Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Post-COVID Business Development Strategies for Success, co-hosted by Alexa Translations and the Legal Marketing Association and sponsored by Grand Columbia Gold. And we will start the webinar today with an introduction of all of our speakers. So I'm Andrew Bowyer. I'm the founder of the Canadian Legal Innovation Forum, which is a series of used to be live conferences, now webinars, mainly focused on innovation in the Canadian legal sector. And prior to that, starting the company, my career, I started at the Financial Times in London, and then was with Bloomberg in London and New York for 13 years. And we'll move on to our next speaker, Gary Kalachi. Gary, maybe a quick intro about yourself.
Thank you, Andrew. Excited to be here today. And this is a summer after we did the first part of this webinar. Gary Kalachi, lawyer by trade, CEO at Alexa Translations, have been on both sides of the equation and really looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Niels?
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Niels Emelsta. I'm the VP and General Counsel at Alamos Gold. So we're a TSX and NYSE listed gold mining company with operations in Canada and Mexico. I previously held the same role at a similar sized mining company, McEwen Mining, and a company called McEwen Capital. I started my career at Stikeman Elliott in Toronto.
Thank you, Niels. Fernando.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. Fernando Garcia. I've been a general counsel at multiple companies for the last 15 years. Always glad to have these conversations and to reach out and to work with such an esteemed panel. So I look forward to this conversation and really talking about business development and how things have changed and shifted and how it's all we're coping with COVID. So it was an interesting conversation and one I'm looking forward to having.
Okay, thanks. Amanda.
Thank you, Andrew. Looking forward to chatting with everyone this afternoon. I'm VP Legal at Grand Columbia Gold Corp, as well as Corporate Secretary at Denarius Silver. I've held similar roles at Caldas Gold last year before change in management, and I started my legal career at, Fasken Martineau.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. And Marie.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I'm Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer at Langlois Lawyers. Langlois is a full-service firm of 150 professionals working from Montreal and Quebec City. I've been in the legal industry for close to 20 years, the last 3 years at Langlois and for over 12 years at Heenan Blakey.
Okay, thanks, Marie. So we'll start the conversation now. Obviously, in March 2020, everything changed for everyone. And for law firms, obviously, there was and their clients in-house, there was a major shift as well. So that's the sort of primary pivot of this conversation. So I'm going to ask the in-house speakers first. How quickly did law firms pivot in the wake of the crisis, and what was your reaction to that? Was it surprised or happy about things? Maybe we'll start with you, Niels.
Sure. And I mean, I sometimes can be a difficult client, but I think the takeaway there is that even if you were a difficult client, you had to you had to become quite flexible really quickly, because I mean, the operational issues we faced were the same ones I think I saw being faced by our external legal services providers. And so I was incredibly impressed by how people pivoted. The ramp up in use of technology, the incredible response by the various employment and labor groups who helped navigate us through those various issues, or the IT groups who helped us navigate through suddenly everyone working on their home devices and home internet connections. And so I think overall it was impressive. I think what impressed me the most were the firms who really shared our values around the empathy, and we're empathetic to their employees and their staff on the personal challenges they faced. And I think that really resonated with us as a company.
Okay, thanks, Niels. Amanda, anything to add in terms of your experience?
No, I agree with Niels. I think it was fairly seamless, to be perfectly honest. And I know Niels deals like I do with lawyers all over the country and various different countries. And for me, I didn't really see that there was anything missing a beat. I'm sure it was much more complicated. And I know we went through some international arbitration last year, which became a bit more complicated because the law firms had to set up, spaces in their actual offices where and get permissions and things like that. But seeing something like an international arbitration done virtually was quite impressive, I have to say.
Thanks, Amanda. Fernando, what was
It's interesting because a lot of the lawyers I deal with are international. In fact, ironically enough, through COVID or as a result of COVID and the responses, I actually got to see some of the lawyers in person and doing some of the Zoom who I had never seen before. We talk on the phone or we do other conversations by email. So in a way, I felt like I connected a bit more with them because I was able to see them and interact with them and put a name to the face and the face to the name. So in that sense, it was good. I think there were some delays and there were some initial sort of hiccups in terms of scheduling things. Obviously, certain litigation matters or issues were delayed as the courts were trying to adjust how they're going to continue. So there was a bit of a delay, a bit of uncertainty, but I think everyone sort of initially, adopted the technology, adopted the tools that were available to us. And in a way, it helped expedite some of the transition that we've been seeing in terms of legal technology, in terms of just how we do our day-to-day work. And so it challenges, but at the same time created opportunities as well.
right? Okay. So shifting, obviously, the other side of the coin, law firm and a technology company and a service provider. So Marie, how was your experience in terms of March 2020, in terms of pivoting at Langlois?
We have to remember that 2 years ago, the legal industry was still mostly working in a very traditional at-work model. So now with the perspective, I would say that with technology and great IT team, we pivoted amazingly fast. It just took us a few days to send everybody home and have the technology in order to connect with the clients. Of course, we didn't know then that it would last so long. And we quickly, realized that we had to find new ways to connect with the clients. So I think that when you looking back, that we were successful and it did work well for us.
Okay, thanks, Marie. Gary, how was your experience March 2020?
Andrew, first of all, it's always exciting with this entire group here. So I feel like every time we do this, even with the prep meeting, it was, we'll still talk about new things this time around that we didn't even get a chance to chat about during our prep. But in essence, we being sort of having offices across the country and abroad, was one of the drivers was that we had internal chats before this came, and they had the video capability before. We used it scarcely, and as soon as this happened, all of a sudden we started using it a lot more, even with colleagues that before we just didn't use it. So somehow this made it reasonable, or it's almost like it encouraged it, to Fernando's point, with some of the colleagues. And I never loved phone calls. For all of you, for all of those that know me, it's try to do coffees and lunches and get-togethers in person, and calls just didn't connect the same way for me. So having the video has really enabled that interaction piece, and not just for me, for our entire BD team for that matter. But I really feel like now I can see more people in the same amount of time, because you don't have to factor in commute time and still have a relatively good connection. And not to say that we're not going to do some of the in-person pieces like we used to. I think that's still needed. There's still an element that we'll get out of it. But the adaptation was great. We've obviously done a lot more of the online presence, a bit of the webinars and sort of the social media components. But really the idea is a lot more of the in-person virtual.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I think probably everybody can relate to the fact that we've met know people on Zoom, but we haven't met them in person. So it will be great to do so in the future. So moving back to the in-house speakers, in terms of once things adjusted, right? We had the initial shock and then changed. How have the relationships between you and law firms, your law firm panels, been managed? And what do you perceive as, positive and negative aspects of that? Maybe we can start with you, Niels.
Sure. So even taking a step back from that, I think COVID really taught us about the value of having, and the value and the effort of building those relationships up front. Because I'm not sure if everyone agrees or not, but I think a lot of people are, sailing on the trailing on the fumes of those relationships that they had in the so-called before times and capitalizing on them now. And I think for us, the reason why our relationships with outside service providers, including counsel, were so strong during COVID was the counsel we work with had really taken the time to understand our business. Not just the legal department, but understand the operational realities of our site, get to know people, had visited in person. And so when everything shut down and we reverted to just being a square on a Zoom call, we already had those established relationships. And so, a tremendous amount of respect for the effort that people put into that. The challenge, as you can imagine, I think law firms did a good job of this, is how do you integrate new people onto mandates and files? And I think it was nice to see senior partners make the effort and take the time to ensure that articling students and associates showed up on these Zoom calls, because now it wasn't a meeting in our office where it would have been strange to bring 5 or 6 people along. It was easy to have them listen in, frankly, and everyone needed part of that relationship building activity to drive the file forward. So I think there's been some real benefits there. The negative of it, of course, as well is negative aspect is when we needed something new where we didn't have those existing relationships, and we asked our counsel, who else in your shop does this work? That's a hard one to hand over in a very virtual setting. And I think we're going to benefit from returning to in-person in that regard.
Yeah. Amanda, what's your take on that? In terms of...
I agree with pretty much everything Neil said. I think the one thing after it became quite apparent that this wasn't going to be sort of like, hey, it's a month shut down and things like that, we have a sort of limited group of trusted counsel that we use. And I think for some of them that were sort of not doing day-to-day stuff, we would normally see them because they'd be traveling to Toronto for various things, PDAC in March, or just traveling generally to work out of their Toronto office. So I think for them, it kind of became a bit more, not difficult, but just kind of not having the, hey, let me just drop by and take you out for a coffee. I'm going to be up in the city for a week. So I think that was a bit more difficult to kind of get a feel necessarily for what you were doing in the day-to-day and how you could help out. But yeah, I agree with Niels. Like, there's been a number of associates that I've met for the first time and haven't had a chance to work with before. So I do think it has been beneficial to a certain extent for juniors to get experience with clients.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to ask Marie about that in a little bit. But Fernando, what's your experience been like in terms of relationships between external providers? And
yeah, I think I concur with all the points that were raised, but I think one additional one is that with so much uncertainty in terms of what we're dealing with, with the HR issue, dealing with people all over the place, and sort of continuity of business and all those elements, it also created an opportunity to build relationships. We are constantly bombarded with information, but there's been very useful information that's been sent to us by people who understand the industry, who understand what we do, and understand the unique challenges that we're facing in this particular circumstance. So sometimes that information has been a good opportunity to open that door for discussion. Some of these webinars have been really useful. You tend to, depending on where you are in a particular comfort zone, you tend to gravitate towards certain types of webinars, but there's been some really useful ones in terms of how to deal with employees in the situation, things like that, which, there isn't necessarily one right answer, but it definitely helps me get different perspectives. And so it has created the opportunity for a new relationship with building, talking about new areas and new skill sets for external counsels want to develop in terms of dealing with pandemic circumstances and how we can help clients in that. There's been opportunities as well created, and it's been, the more they can help us sort of help our clients, and the more they can help create certainty in uncertain times, the more they've improved the relationship, the value they bring to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally changed the game. Marie, on the law firm side, what's yours? How have you adjusted in terms of your relationship management?
The first thing we did was very simple. In a crisis situation, what do? You go back to basics. So the first thing we've done, since information is key, is in the first few months, we put together a daily and thorough media coverage for the whole firm, including what was happening in Europe. We wanted to be ahead of what was coming. More than ever, we needed a client-centric approach. Clients' concerns were different. We wanted to understand what was keeping them up at night to be relevant. So of course, how did we do that? We build on existing relationship. Relationship takes work, but it's worth it. So our lawyers simply reached out more than ever with their clients. The meaningless "how are you" question started to make sense. We all had one thing in common to talk about. And all of a sudden, we started to talk about family, kids, cats, and dogs. We let people into our personal lives in ways we have shied away before. So many of our relationships were brought to another level. And if I may, I will give you one example. I will take our labor and employment practice group just to give you like a general idea of what happened over there. They worked as a team. They quickly identified upcoming issues and challenges. They did their homework. They anticipated what their concern and question would be. When I say they, I mean the clients. On January 2020, we were the first firm in Quebec to write about pandemic and upcoming issues in the workplace. So working as a team enabled them to bring the highest expertise to their client. So we did it all: webinar, client presentation, client pitch, media pitches, social media. We were basically everywhere. And just to bring you back in time, the first questions were, can I ban my employees from traveling on their personal time? They went from, how do you manage quarantine? How do you reduce pay? Basically, all of the labor issues that every business had to deal with. So 18 months later, we're talking about 164 media interviews, over 25 related labor and employment publication on website, media, etc., and countless webinars. So what we've been able to achieve is not only to reach a larger audience, but also to keep holding the smaller event. So this group was successful because they found ways to reach out to clients and provide them with practical and meaningful advice. As a group, they took position, they were efficient, and they had united orientation. They remained relevant throughout the crisis. And so what happened? All of this not only increased business with existing clients, we were successful in cross-selling in the firm, and we got new clients. This is one of the many initiatives we worked on, but I wanted to give you like one complete idea.
That's a great example.
How valuable is it if you get a call from your law firm and you say, hey, listen, you know what? I'm not billing you for this, but 15 minutes, let's talk. What are some things you're dealing with? How can I help you out? At least at a high level, without sort of being nervous about calling because you know that the clock's going to start ticking right away, right? Just that's how you build a relationship, and that's how you build trust.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think there's two things that, Marie, I want to ask, and Amanda and Niels brought it up about involving associates, right? Who, Amanda, I think you said it'd be strange for 5 or 6 people to show up to a meeting. So Marie, like, has that changed in terms of, you know, the client facing conversations at your firm?
We try to promote team working. So for that labor group, whenever they were holding these meetings and to understand what was happening, of course, the younger lawyers were there, and for the FaceTime of the clients also. It's easy, like on a Zoom, to have more people online. So of course, we included them, and we try to make sure that no one would be left out.
Right. So Gary, what you know, moving on to you, like, what's your experience been like in terms of at Alexa translations?
Well, you know, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think the audience here would as well. So Alexa was events heavy. Many of you have attended our events, and so this really changed our paradigm. It's, you know, there was a lot of heavy investment in the personal interaction and really connecting with people. So COVID threw that all out of the window. But to Niels's point, we were riding off of the fumes of a, you know, a relationship we had developed before. So that was really, it really makes you appreciate how handy that comes in, because that investment in a time where now you can do it in person, you've already established a lot of those pre-existing relationships. We also did something that may seem counterintuitive. I know a lot of the marketing audience will appreciate this. We actually invested far more in marketing in the middle of COVID, while other organizations were cutting marketing budgets. We're like, this is the time to invest in marketing communications, and it has been noticed and it has been seen, and you see the results of it. I think you need to stay present somehow. And I think the communications piece and connecting with clients in the various ways was important. We also spent a lot of time just checking in with people, where I'm like, Niels, let's catch up. I'm not even looking for anything specific, but this is our strange times, you know. Marie, how are you handling this? And what are some of the things you're doing? And really connecting with people. And I think that's one of the things that it goes unnoticed. And the marketing BD people at law firms always got this, and it was, the joke was always that, oh, we get this, it's the lawyers that work with us and need to get this. But, you know, connecting with people for the sake of relationship building and connecting without an agenda is helpful. It gives you credibility. It shows that you care. Adding that value without saying, can I build this, matters. So those were a lot of the things we spent time on, and it really paid off.
Right. Yeah. Niels, I think you were.
I was going to tie together what Gary and Marie were saying, because I think, you know, the small value added elements during the pandemic went so much further than they did in the before times. And I've talked about law firm business development in the past, and I love using this example. But law firms, you know, often put out really valuable bulletins and free legal education, and that goes a tremendously long way to keep me and my team informed. I used to work with a relatively small regional firm in the US, and not only would they provide a bulletin, but they would provide the Word version. And they would send it along with a little note that says, here's a bulletin for your board. Here's a bulletin for your senior management team. You put your name on it, say we wrote it, it doesn't matter. We don't care how you use it. But here's something that makes you look smart internally. And it always struck me as such a small incremental effort to make my life easier. And those small incremental efforts, paid back in such significant dividends during COVID, when everything else was just difficult. It just took one thing off my plate. One example.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. So there's a couple things I want to talk about that sort of in the conversation, but that I know we talked about it in the planning call, Niels. And Amanda, I mean, what kind of things, like Niels is saying, like bulletins, like what do you really appreciate? And what there's obviously lots of noise, right? So what cuts through for you?
Yeah, that's what I was going to add to that on that last question. The thing that I found, and I think probably Niels and Fernando would agree with me, that there are so many bulletins, and law firms, even if you've never worked with them, they find your email address. So you just get bombarded with what looks like looks like could be the exact same bulletin from 10 different firms. So at a certain extent, when you're busy, my initial reaction is just like delete, delete, delete. Like, thank you very much, law firm X, that you've sent this and you took the time, but I don't know. But then I've had lawyers that are litigators, send me a personal email, say, hey, Amanda, I know you've got a lot of stuff going on. There's this that we put out, and I actually think, it's not my area of expertise, but I know that this would be useful to you guys, would be important. Let me know if you want to talk, or I can put you in touch with, our expert in this area. So I find very small things like that, just to, as you said, cut through the noise, makes my life a whole lot easier, as opposed to having to go out and search for, okay, well, who do I talk to at this firm that I don't know, kind of thing.
Right. Fernando, what's your take on it?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a good point. And things like templates, or instead of just raising questions, give me answers. Tell me what I should do. I mean, not just what points I should consider, but what are some recommendations? What are people doing? What's the industry doing? Things like vaccinations. What do you do with employees who refuse to be vaccinated? And you have a very sensitive situation at work where other people are very sensitive about it. Things like that. Like, the more you can provide practical advice to sort of facilitate, or agreements or templates, things like that just make our life easier. Kind of like what Niels was saying in terms of the bulletins. Make sure that they're relevant, that they're practical, and that they give advice and even tools and things like that. The value for that is tremendous. And again, you might say, they won't call me to do this work because now you have the template, but things always come from that. So it's generating business. It might not be immediate or direct, but there's a lot of other things that flow from that. But once you sort of value the relationship and you appreciate the fact that they're thinking of you and they're trying to help you, that's the most important thing. At the end of the day, like you said, the key of external counsel is to make in-house counsel look good and look good in front of their clients. So it's whatever you can do to help them. It's very much appreciated.
Great insights there, Marie. In terms of that, I mean, has your strategy changed during the pandemic in terms of, and another question just to add to that, and I think I'll ask Gary as well, is we talked about it in the planning call, is you get a lot of doing things virtually, you can see who's watching and how long they're watching things, you can accumulate data, and that can drive your decision making from it. So, how's that played out for you?
It's true that we got better over the last year, because we could tell who was reading what and how much time they were spending. So of course, you get tricks on attracting and being more practical in getting a better abstract in what you're writing. And as I was mentioning, we used to hold like one annual conference, 400, 500 people in a hotel boardroom. People get there, and if it's not as interesting, well, they'll probably pick up their phone, start looking at their email. They don't exit the room. But when you start doing stuff virtually, if you're not right on, if it's not interesting, and if you're not ready and you're not practical, people leave. So we started to measure who was there 5 minutes after the intro, because you need to let people be there. And we knew when the end was coming. So 10 minutes before, we were capturing again, and then we would get data from that. The other thing that was also very interesting at first is the lawyers were really, really appreciating our comments. So we were doing dry run of those events. So we got better, they got better, and we were able to measure. The other thing that we've done is, after an event, we always send a little survey, which asks the clients, what do you want to hear about? And do you have any questions? Well, in some cases, we had 600-700 people on the platforms. Like, remember, the labor issues were a concern for everyone. We took the time to answer each and every one of those questions. So the client's reaction was fantastic, and we got a lot out of this. So again, marketing is not going to be different. It's always going to be newsletter and ways of communication. It is what you do with it and how personalized you make it. And like Amanda was saying, yes, you can send a newsletter to a client, but the little note saying, I read this and I thought of you, and if you want, I can put you in touch or I can help you, makes the whole difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it in terms of scaling that? sort of approach, how do you do that, in your firm, in saying to lawyers like, this works really well, can you do it more?
The good thing is that there was so many publication and so many webinars that we were able to compare them in time. We were able to say, this is working, this is not working. And of course, the whole team was assisting. We had lawyers and we were doing, retroaction to provide the feedbacks and also feedbacks from clients. Clients were taking the time to say what they liked and what they didn't like. So again, it's basically a mix of what we got through the surveys, what we got through the marketing, because I have a great team. So from their perspective, we all put that together and we got better, and we will get better over and over, but we're good now. I can say like proudly, the lawyers are ready. They respect the time. They respect what the objectives are, and I think clients appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like it, right? So Gary, you have a great market. You even seeing the marketing for this webinar, videos on LinkedIn and stuff. So you've obviously got a great marketing team at Alexa. How has it changed for you in terms of adding value to your clients and ways that you're doing that as a service provider?
I'm about to give away my secrets, Andrew. So to everyone, listen carefully. We did something revolutionary that that I think everyone should do. We actually picked up the phone and asked a bunch of our clients, how can we add value to you? What would you like to see? And then we actually had a mini group of champions where we said, before we send it out largely to a larger audience, can we run it by you and let us know what you think? Hey, Fernando, would you mind taking a look at this for me? Amanda, would you mind taking a look at this for me? Give me any feedback and I will listen. I promise I will listen. I promise all these will be implemented. We're not just asking for this for the sake of checking off a box. And I know it sounds trivial, and that's what, but it's just so important, right? Like it's, the simple act of just saying, can I take 5 minutes of your time and just ask you what would really help and what would add value? And I'll keep doing it, and I'll keep track of this. One of the things that came up early on as we went into the lockdown initially, the volume of communications went up significantly. Everyone had to deal with a lot more communication, whether it was incoming, whether they were sending it out. And one of the things that they had to do, especially if they were national organizations, they had to do it bilingually. And all of a sudden they were like, well, how can we do this bilingually? And a lot of the clients said, hey, any chance you can give us access to your AI as a courtesy? Because there's no way we're getting anything through a budget now, but we'd love to have it as a courtesy. And it probably will help you in the long run. And we said, you know what, we will listen to what you have to say. And here it is. It's as a courtesy, obviously for a reasonable amount of time, but it was just that, listen to what they had to say and the simple fact of picking up the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's a great, segue into what I want to talk about next, which is the idea of empathy. And we talked about it in our planning call, and really understanding what is, in terms of the relationship, what adds value, is one part of it, of course, but it's also empathizing with what, them on a personal level. Niels, I think you brought it up in, earlier, you notice that change, right? We're all responding to this COVID thing. It's a universal crisis, right? And so there's a commonality that everyone has. So how has the empathy thing, part of things, changed in your terms of your relationship with external providers? And how much does it matter? How is it? What's your perception of that?
I do think it matters. I think Marie really succinctly, described it earlier, which is, we're inviting people into our homes by video conference. You hear my kids and my dog in the background. I have to leave early because I actually just have to get out of the house. I have to pick something. There's a whole new familiarity with people's lives that you didn't have before. And I do think that if you have relationships and you're willing to take the time to get to know people and actually understand what professionally keeps them up at night, and what their needs are, it's a lot easier to work with someone. I think that, you know, that is to some extent the pandemic. If you had those existing relationships, they brought people together even more closely, which is why, you know, we haven't, as a result of the pandemic, gone to any new counsel. It's been a focus on the cross sales within firms, with getting vetted and validated people. And I think the people who've done that really well are the ones who are, you know, aware and empathetic to the fact that dealing with new counsel on a new matter can be stressful as well. So they've afforded that continuity of care and oversight as a relationship partner. I think it's also, you know, in really simple terms, it's just an understanding of what, you know, it is like to manage a legal team when everyone's dispersed, and you may be bringing in new people who you know, have never met you in person. You have new staff, you have, you know, new internal clients, and trying to play a role to be helpful in dealing with that. I think it ultimately comes back to what I think I alluded to earlier, is if you understand my business and my internal audiences and the stresses and pressure points, and you took the time to do that, whether during COVID or before, it's a lot easier to service us as an organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amanda, what's your take on the empathy part and how that's sort of changed relationships or with external providers?
Well, excuse me, I think Niels has hit the nail on the head with this, and I'm going to apologize because they're testing the fire alarms in my building right now, and they just started going off again. So I apologize to everyone in advance. But no, I think if you have a good relationship from the beginning, you know, it kind of, you see everyone in all of their foibles with this, because, you know, like I used to go to the office and everyone's dressed up and this and that. And, you know, at the end of the day, sometimes I was like, yeah, you know what, I'm going on Zoom and I am going to look like I rolled out of bed, and too bad, so sad. And you're still not going to judge me because you kind of look the same. So I find that that's sort of, as you said, it's broken down a lot of walls. And, you know, I just found too, I don't have kids, so I know everyone has different things, but I know being single, like law firms have reached out to me, people I know, they're going, hey, how are you doing? Do you want to go for a walk? You know, because like, you might actually want to see people other than the ones that you work with all the time, you know, socially distanced and acceptable. So I think it is really knowing who your client is and what it is, like you said, Niels, like what keeps you up at night, you know, or what doesn't keep you up at night. And I think firms have become very much more realizing that everyone's human, everyone has their personal things. And I think, Marie, like you were saying originally, you know, people all of a sudden were like working from home. And before the pandemic, a lot of law firms were like, you have to be in the office. You need to sit there. I expect to see you with the FaceTime. And now I think that's going to change going forward. So that I might be overstepping into another part of our conversation, but I think, so I won't go too far, but I think everyone has become very realistic about things. Like, I'm going to have dinner with my family tonight at 7 o'clock. You can get a hold of me at 8:30, but whereas before when you were at the office, I don't think lawyers tended to do that with clients as much sometimes, like put a barrier on when they're available and when they're not.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's such an interesting thing, right? Such a change. And Fernando, what are your thoughts on the empathy? And I'm also going to ask the audience to empathize with me a little bit. I have to plug in my computer, so I'm going to disappear my screen for a second. But for live, but Fernando, maybe you can give us your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I think understanding your client or understanding your audience, right? And for example, I've had situations where there's a conference and you get a cup of coffee that's delivered to you, so that, you know, at the time when the conference begins or the meeting, everybody has the same cup of coffee. I know it might sound silly, but it creates that little human touch, or that sort of bringing people together at a time when we're also distant and apart. And I think, you know, the biggest challenge when we're talking about empathy is not necessarily how we dealt with it, because I think a lot of us got forced and we had to deal with it the same way. But really, it's how we're going to deal with it. Because there's going to be people who are going to want to jump right in and be in person at the next conference. There's other people who are going to take a little longer to say, I'm comfortable with meeting people, being in a larger group, and to doing sort of going back to normal and whatever new normal will be. So I think we're going to have to be understanding in that sense and adjust to things, because to account for people's different needs and different concerns and different interests. And at the same time, again, I'll probably be one of the first ones to be at an in-person conference somewhere. I can't wait. But there's others who are going to not be in that same situation, and we have to understand that and be able to still continue to do business and network with them in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Fernando, I'll have you speak at the first live conference we put on at the Canadian Legal Innovation Forum. So there you go. There's so I know we, in the interest of time, we have so much to cover here. Great comments on the empathy part. I think all of us, it's obviously been a once in a lifetime thing, the pandemic. And in terms of moving forward, right? Because we're in a bit of a transition right now, moving towards a new normal. What aspects of terms of relationship management and marketing do you want to keep moving forward when we can meet in person again, and what are you really looking forward to? So maybe Marie, from the law firm perspective, you could let us know what your thoughts are on that.
I think we'll keep all of them,
Yeah.
but we will have to come up with hybrid solutions, because it will be important to give options to the clients. Some clients will choose and just cannot wait to go back or come back to an in-person conference, but other will want to attend it from home or even from work. Even if there's a Zoom fatigue, it's there to stay. And I think that more than ever, clients will choose how they spend their time, where they go, and what they read. So it's going to be very important to be practical and also build on the relationship that we have worked on. Because if you start to know things about your clients and their preference, and you don't factor them in your marketing strategy, it's going to be a big miss. And I think that also that COVID and all the resulting impact in the legal marketplace accelerated a general trend in marketing that was already there. The rules of marketing, to me, and the game will remain the same.
Right. And Gary, how about you? I mean, what do you think it's going to look like when we go to the new normal?
Well, Marie is spot on. I think we need to, building on that empathy piece, we need to really listen to our clients and what they like. And what we hear so far is that they actually do want the hybrid solution. They do like the flexibility that this proved. Whereas before there was a level of discomfort of having teams work from home, we've now all proven that it can be done, and it can be done effectively. I think especially in the service industry, efficiency didn't necessarily go down. In many cases it went up, right? So those are things that we have to consider. And as we do events and launches and coffees coming up, it's actually about asking the clients. But I guarantee you, I'll be using the video avenues going forward on an ongoing basis. So Andrew, I know you're in Vancouver. I can't see you in person. We're certainly going to make this work. I'm going to chat with Marie like this. Sometimes she just comes and calls me because now I'm sick of seeing you. But again, listening to clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
For what it's worth, Gary, you still have to buy me lunch.
But that's the point. You are open to that, so we'll do that. And that's the whole point of this, is listening and adjusting. But I think the hybrid solution is here to stay. I like the vulnerability that this brought about, and it showed us that we are a lot more open. My cat parades here, Tammy picked up properly that my cat in the back, and it's okay, the cat parades occasionally. It's that little piece of, when we have this facades in the networking and so on, makes us less human. And every piece of research out there says that the human interaction piece makes us like people better, trust people better, and frankly makes us happier in our interaction. So why not embrace it?
And Gary, I should add, and I'll give you a pat on the back for this, but I think a thing you do very well is it's not on a bilateral basis. You know, your marketing is often on a multilateral basis. You bring people facing the same challenges and issues together in a way that's very symbiotic. And I think especially during a pandemic, that's extremely helpful. And I've seen other law firms do this as well, which is I don't just need to learn the lessons of my external service providers. I can, you know, learn them from my colleagues who are facing the same challenges and also utilize their ideas.
Right.
Great points, absolutely. Fernando, in terms of moving forward, what do you want to keep in terms of relationship management with external providers, and what do you want to go back to?
Yeah, no, I think some of the things, like, for example, facilitating things like contract reviews, where we're using technology to be in different places, but everybody makes the changes and we can see it. And we can all approve on the changes at the same time. Things like being able to sign the documents, everybody from different places. There's been a lot of efficiencies that have been created through this. And so we need to find the proper balance of efficiencies with humanity and being able to still meet people and greet people and be able to do that personal touch. But at the same time, if we can do things more effectively and efficiently, then we need to adopt that as well for multiple reasons, in terms of the efficiency element, for environmental reasons, not having to travel as much maybe. So there's been a lot of benefits that have come out of this situation that we've learned from, and then we need to be able to adapt and to use those learnings to make sure that we meet all these multiple stakeholder interests and demands and wants.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, how many meetings can we have in a day now? Right. It's amazing. Amanda.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think everyone has kind of already covered most of it. I think it's going to be a bilateral sort of mishmash of what's going on, and some people are like, I'm going to want to be in the office 5 days a week and I want to see you and this and that, but that also may get a bit boring too, again, after the first couple of months, you know. So it's I think it's going to have to be on a person by person basis and at the time as where things are going, because we don't know what's happening, you know, going forward with COVID and variants and things like that. And I think we talked about it last week too, is what do we want our service providers, you know, do we want to go out to lunch? Yes, I also would like lunch from you, Gary, to see. we're all going to go. But I think part of the empathy thing too is also to realize what's going on and recognize that things are going to change for each person, and especially with COVID, whereas, you know, you may have small children that can't be vaccinated. So once they start going back to school, do I want to be doing as many in-person lunches? Or I may have a vulnerable family member. So even though, Gary, last week I did go to lunch with you, I'm not really comfortable for the next couple of weeks. And I think it's just not to assume that because a client wants to do this one time, that they're going to be all in all the time, right. recognizing differences in what's happening in their lives.
And I think when we'll, you know, obviously when things do get a bit more normal, there'll be you know, Gary's going to be taking a lot of people for lunch. It sounds like we're getting some comments even from the audience that they're so we'll take note of that. And then when it goes back to whatever the new normal looks like, it will be different. And I think that, you know, Amanda, that's a great point on the empathy piece. And so I think we're getting we got to about 50 minutes. I'm sorry to the speakers. I had a lot more questions to ask, but I also want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So please do put it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll ask them. And we also had a number of people ask some questions before the webinar. So here's a little bit of a lighter note. Someone asked, you know, return to formal attire. So what's everyone's the 15-second take on that? Are we gonna be wearing suits and again, or
no?
No. Okay.
I don't think they fit. I think my ties will fit me. I think that's about it. So no.
Okay.
Business casual.
I don't know. I think it will. I think, the pendulum has swung one way and it tends to
Yeah.
swing too much the other way. At the end of the day, you'll end up somewhere in between. But I think there's going to be initially like that. Oh, I want to wear my suit. I want to look good. I want to be able to dress up to go somewhere to do something like that. So I think eventually there will be, and then there's going to be sort of more of a gradual sort of middle ground that emerges.
Fernando's a far classier guy than I am.
That.
And so, but I think you're right. But I think what I think we will see is there's going to be far more flexibility and understanding that when you roll in on a, maybe it's not just Friday casual, but for life circumstances, Monday casual is okay sometimes, right? Let's hope.
Yeah. Let's hope we have some warnings so we can fit into those suits. Fine, right? So that's a bit of a lighthearted question. Moving on to there was one which is actually interesting, very interesting one, is alternative legal service providers. So not traditional law firms, and I wanted to get the in-house people's take on what's your view on ALSPs. Nils, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of?
I think that's the way the world's going. I mean, it's going to be driven by technology-led solutions that drive costs down and make our lives easier. And I think law firms would do themselves a tremendous service by being the facilitator of those instead of the competitors of those, and focus on that really accretive, high value add strategic insight that I'm paying a lot of money for. Let's figure out a way to work together on dealing with the day-to-day, as opposed to me having to source those elements. I'd love for a big firm to come to me with a technology solution rather than offering to have an associate do it.
Yeah.
Fernando, what's your thanks? Thank you.
For 100%, I think that's critical, and that's a space where I think there's opportunity for growth. There's lots of synergy opportunities there, and I think that's something that maybe the pandemic has taught us, that we need to do things more effectively and efficiently. This is one way. You can't do everything. Stick to the things you do best, and let other people sort of facilitate and build that relationship together by being more effective and efficient together.
Yeah, we see that trend. Obviously, some major Canadian law firms are building in-house ALSPs, right? And providing that. Amanda, do you have any views on the rise of ALSPs?
Yeah, I think, as Niels and Fernando have said, it's happening. It's going to be happening. And, if someone can come in and, reduce some of our budget, do some things more quickly, and make us as in-house counsel look really good, like if you can reduce some of the legal fees and all that, our bosses are going to be happy, so it's and I mean, I certainly know, or being a junior and things like that and going through due diligence, that stuff sucks, so I'm sure some of the things that don't need to be done by a person, that can be sourced out with then review, it makes everyone happier, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting trend, and I think it's not going away. Marie, in terms of your firm's focus on doing things differently, providing services in a different way, using technology, what's your take on that, or what's your strategy?
It depends on the area of practice and the people we work with, but it's part of the eye level strategy. In some situation, we already work with those suppliers, and in other situation, we have a foster relationship, and we're looking and working towards that. And it's always done in a certain situation with the client's need. So right. This is how we approach it.
Right. Gary, anything to add on ALSPs?
Well, my view towards technology. Anything that can actually help find efficiencies, and we had to go through that with the translators, where you are adding now a technology that changes their day-to-day and an adoption, and then educating clients on it. I think fighting technology is never a good idea. I think adopting it wisely with the right preparation, with a plan on adoption is key. That's the solution. It's not avoiding it. It's adopting properly with a strategic approach around it.
Right, absolutely. Final question, actually, great one from the audience. Recruitment. How would you proceed with that in the future? You know, obviously, all of you have teams working for you, and so, you know, interviews in person and over Zoom, is that going to change? Nils, maybe we can start with you, or what what you've seen so far. I mean, that in terms of hiring during the pandemic.
I've added, you know, 2 people to my team, one person who's yet to join and one person who's joined, and I think it went quite well. I hope we return to more of an in-person approach, because those personal relationships are so important. I mean, I don't have anything profound to say here, other than that I think it just takes longer to build those personal relationships when you're doing it with technology, and you have to be patient, and you have to be really conscious about having those small talk discussions that you now organically don't have around the water cooler, the metaphorical water cooler.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because if you have an existing relationship and you've met in person, there's an empathy part which comes in, which we talked about, but you haven't, you know, in terms of employee-employer kind of thing, it's quite different not meeting them. There has to be that sort of face-to-face interaction to build those relationships. Amanda, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I would absolutely say for something like that, especially in our office, which is a very small office in Toronto, like 10 people, you need to fit in. You know, and so there's nowhere to hide kind of thing. So I think it probably depends on the size and what your facilities are. But I just find, if it's, especially as you've said, if it's someone that you haven't met before, you just get a different feeling over Zoom as opposed to going and having a coffee. So that's just my priority. That's my preference, but that's just, I like to get the feel for people.
Yeah. So it does speak to people being in the office more eventually, right?
Yeah.
Fernando, thoughts?
Yeah, I haven't had to hire anyone, but I'll tell you that when I used to, in my former role, I would have people come in and we had all 5 of us or 6 of us in the legal team sitting around the table and talking to them. And it wasn't really putting them on the spot. It was more about seeing how they interacted, they're related. Because, you know, at the end of the day, legal skills, everybody has gaps that they need to fill in, get more experience in. But really how you interact with people, how you're able to carry a conversation, just how, you know, you get along and you welcome the team and you're able to work with the team. You can't do that over Zoom call. You can, you know, you still need to have that face-to-face. And so I think that's what everything.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Marie?
Nothing much to add, but maybe like the first interviews, I was fortunate not to have to hire during the pandemic, but maybe the first interviews to start to select candidate could be done virtually, but for sure, to make sure that it's going to be a fit with the team, you need the in-person interaction.
Thanks, Marie. Gary, any final word?
Well, you know, we have been fortunate, Alex. Our team is actually over 50% larger than this time last year. So needless to say, there was a lot of hiring done in the pandemic. We learned to be good at hiring and training people. But I will tell you, from a BD recruiting perspective, we expect people to be far more in-person present. So although we're okay with them working a couple of days a week from home, they need to be accessible and meet our clients in person with that geographic proximity. So if you're somebody that is catering to Quebec-based clients, well, you're Montreal-based. You're not going to be based out of Calgary. The geographic presence, the ability. So when Niels and Amanda say, "Can we do that lunch?" and Kelly jumps in and all of a sudden turns into an event because you're like, "Oh, this would be great to meet each other." It's all done in person.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's a really interesting takeaway too, right? It's that the geography will matter again. It hasn't mattered so much, but it's going to matter again. So we're at 2 p.m. now, Eastern. So we will wrap up. So I want to thank Marie, Gary, Fernando, Amanda, and Nils for all taking part in today's discussion. We really didn't cover everything we intended to, so we'll have to have another one. And I want to thank Alexa Translations and the Legal Marketing Association for putting this on, and Gran Colombia for being the sponsor. And with that, I want to thank the audience for listening in today, and looking forward to seeing everyone in person sometime soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
So
Thanks,
with
Andrew.
that, we'll wrap things up. So thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.